Hello, family. Patrice Gordon is our guest today. She's an established executive coach and personal development advocate. Patrice specializes in women's development programs and reverse mentoring. Get this, she spearheaded the development of reverse mentoring at Virgin Atlantic with the initial focus on how race and ethnicity impact development in the workplace. She's recently made a pivot in her focus, and I'm excited to talk with her and share her successes and insights with you about this. Enjoy. Patrice, it's a pleasure to have you on today. We got a lot to talk about, girls. So why don't we start from the very beginning? You're good with that?
I am. Lovely to see you, JBH.
Wonderful to see you again. It was fun actually seeing you on Harvard's campus, where we had some provoking conversations around what's going on in the larger world today in terms of the Israel-Hamas war, Ukraine, Africa, all kinds of conflicts. But that's not what we're talking about today. I want you to share with our family your journey and the impeccable work you're doing as an innovator, as well as the deliverer of content that's helping us to all work well together so we don't continue to have international nor local conflicts. You're good with that?
I'm so good with that. Thank you for inviting me.
Okay, well, here we go. So you were 3 years old when you immigrated from Jamaica to the United Kingdom. Take us back to your early life and share with us your childhood. Would you do a little bit of that for us?
Of course. So as JBH, as you just said, I was born in Jamaica and moved to the UK when I was 3, with my mum, my aunt, and my dad. We lived in South London, where I was born and raised. I went to a Catholic girls' school. Much to my mum's delight, she wanted to move me out of kind of Croydon into a bit more of the countryside to get a really good education. And just a bit of background, the real intention of mum moving me from Jamaica was to ensure that I got a better education over in the UK and had access to more opportunities. Mum was born here but grew up in Jamaica. Dad was born in Jamaica and was brought up in Jamaica. And so we really worked on building a life for ourselves in the UK. My grandparents came over on the Windrush. So this year we celebrated 75-year anniversary in the UK of the Windrush.
Which you should, which I may interrupt you and say,
yes,
you should explain what that's about, because you have people listening to
that's
you
very
from
true.
many countries.
Sorry, I made an assumption there. So the Windrush was the first ship that the UK invited people from the Caribbean to the UK to help rebuild the economy post the war. The manpower was almost depleted in the UK, and they needed people to work roles such as nursing or like public services. So these are roles that were really underemployed, so there was not a lot of people who could do those roles, and that's why they invited lots of people over from the Caribbean to fulfill that role.
And let's just be really clear. The reason they didn't have a lot of people was multiple, because a lot of men were fighting the war, even still then. And men at that time in the UK's history and world history had those jobs that were the professional and semi-professional jobs. And there's always a lot of need for that type skill after any type of conflict. So seeking people from Jamaica who did have education or who did have the ability to quickly learn was a way to help ramp up there.
Exactly. Yes, thank you for clarifying. And it was a big pull also from all around the Caribbean. So it was an interesting time for my grandparents. Unfortunately, my grandmother passed away before I had the ability to meet her. So my granddad is still alive and still here. He came over and he was a mechanic. She was actually a nurse. And so we really fulfilled some of those roles. Mum brought over from the UK into the Caribbean to be brought up by her big sister. And this is really common for people of the Windrush generation, simply because when they came over, they needed to work really hard and they didn't have the social support circles that they would have normally back at home. So it was really common for them to send their children back to the Caribbean to be brought up by relatives and siblings. And I didn't really understand that when I was younger. I thought it was quite unfair, but now I'm older, I can understand how much you need that family circle around you when you're trying to build a new life in a new country.
Yeah, absolutely.
So growing up, I had a really great childhood. We didn't have a lot, but what we did have was a lot of love. And I never thought that I would go to university. I'm the first person of my family to go to university. And that was not because I didn't realize how intelligent I was or I didn't have ambition, but it simply was no one in my circle that had gone to university. And so mum particularly brought me up with a lot of love, in that you can do whatever you decide to do. And as I started to get tested more and more in school, I recognized that I had a little thing for numbers. And the reason I love numbers is because I can get it right. And if I practice harder, I knew that I could get higher grades. And so that was something that I really leaned in to focus on. When I got to 16 years old or 15, I decided I didn't want to stay at the Catholic girls' school that my mum had fought so hard to get me into, and said, actually, Mum, I want to go to a mixed college in South London, a different area of South London. She wasn't too impressed with me, but she trusted me that she'd brought up a headstrong young lady, that I'd evaluated the situation, and I wanted to get myself a little bit out of my comfort zone. In addition, our school wasn't that diverse, and I really wanted to go somewhere where I could see a little bit more representation.
So when you say your school wasn't that diverse, most people, when they think and have not had a relationship in particular with London or England or the UK, that it is a white country with white people. Some who enjoy much of the content that's put out of studios understand, like, say, if you're watching the Midwives series, you get a visit with what parts of London looked like from early through late 60s. Or if you watch any of the war historics, you get some understanding. But what was your London like when you grew up? And when you say there wasn't a lot of diversity there, what are you speaking of? Were you the minority, or were white people the minority?
So I would say in South London, I was the majority. So it was in the UK, there are certain areas where Caribbean people congregate. And that is lots of pockets of London, but South London in particular. So lots of people would have heard of Brixton on the call, and South London, where I grew up, which was Taunton Heath, was close to Brixton. So in that aspect, there were lots of people in our community, but the education in those areas was not necessarily as high a standard as other areas where Black people would be more of a minority.
Now, when the Africans came in, and started to come in bigger numbers, was that a different dynamic for Black Africans coming into London?
I would say
came in at university level, yes.
Yeah, yes, that's true. So I would say growing up, I think the Caribbean and African community was more separate than they were together, but definitely now we've definitely gelled more together and we're kind of almost one in the same, which is really beautiful to see over the years. And then as you just mentioned, lots of people came over at more as a senior college and university level to get that higher level of education. So mum's real push for me really to go to a school where I was a minority was recognizing that in those areas, the standard of education and the standards to which the authorities held those schools to were higher. And so she wanted to put me in that environment so that I could kind of aim higher and reach higher, right? She moved me all the way from Jamaica to get a better education, and she wanted to push me a little bit further. So when I went to college, what was surprising is everyone was applying to university. I was a floor manager in a department store. So for the guys on the phone, like Macy's, basically I was a weekend store manager in the children's wear department of Macy's, imagine. We had an equivalent in the UK of Debenhams. And I genuinely thought that I would become a floor manager one day. And that was my aim and objective. Not even a store manager, a floor manager. And that was because I did something, I was good at it, and I could see that there was a track for me to get to management level. But when I got to college, people are applying for university. And I was like, okay, I've kind of heard about it, but was never in my sphere of I might do that one day. And the teachers were so encouraging. They were like, yeah, of course you need to apply. Like, this is what an application looks like. You need to decide what you want to do, and we'll help you through the process. And if you can believe, at the age of 16, that was the first time someone had spoken to me about that. And I'd been going to this Catholic girls' school for so much time, and no one had even thought that that was a possibility for me. And it was that point that I knew I'd made the right decision to switch it up and go to a different place where they saw my potential. And what was really surprising is that the more I got tested, the harder I studied, the better grades I got. And so I did psychology, maths, business management, general studies, and media studies at A level. And I enjoyed all of them. I picked subjects that I really enjoyed. And it was then I really started to tread into what is it that I really enjoy and what could I be really good at? And psychology was a surprise for me because I'd never really touched on psychology before. So then fast forward.
Yeah. Before we go there, psychology as a major for you makes so much sense, I'm sure, if you look retrospectively at it, because you were landed into a community that was full of immigrant and new located people. There was the agreement England had with those Caribbean nations and islands that had been colonialized.
The Commonwealth.
That they would have free passage back and forth. So the immigration we're talking about really isn't immigration in the sense that the U.S. is looking at right now, with people from different nations who don't have a citizen nor Commonwealth relationship to the U.S. Your travel from Jamaica to England was travel from one part of your Commonwealth to the other. Yes?
Yeah, absolutely. Yes.
Okay, so there would have been cultural aspects that people who are native from those islands would have had about going on to the UK and establishing a new life. So in many senses, it was still an immigrant experience within a homeland. Yes,
absolutely. Yep. I think, when I look at my mum came over here when she was 25, and bearing in mind she hadn't lived in the UK as an adult, she came back to the UK as an adult with a child. And I think any of us move into a new country with a child at the age of 25 would be quite daunting, right? And trying to figure out the rules of engagement in this new land.
And I think that when you marry that to the expectation and to the extended family back home, then it comes back to my point that it really does seem quite sensible that you would have chosen this track, even though you never imagined this would be the track you would engage in, just from being part of a cultural community that was finding its way in its own nation, with new experiences, new hopes, and quite frankly, there were new challenges.
Yeah, absolutely. I think God's got a way, right? Even when you don't know the way, he kind of guides you in the way you should go. So I applied to university, I got in, and I decided to major in business. But as I just said, I really love numbers and structure and knowing when I can get things right. But I also love the people aspect of understanding people and what motivates them. So I majored in both. So I majored in accounting and psychology. And for me, growing up, like I said, we didn't have a lot, but I was very happy. But I also recognized the potential that I had. And I always say that my mum's ceiling is my floor, or my ancestors' ceiling is my floor. So there is no way, shape or form I could emerge from this opportunity and this life and this stage without doing more than what they did, because they'd set the foundation for me. And so that's the reason I selected accounting as my first career, because for me, that showed me structure. I knew what my earning potential would be, and I knew by when I could get there. In addition to that, instilled into me was people can take lots of things away from you, but the one thing they can't take away from you is your education. And an educated individual is a very powerful individual. So having access to high levels of education, even now, you can see my bookshelves in the background, even though they're my books on the shelf. I love to read, I love to develop, and I love to learn, because that's the one thing that people can't take away from me. And I've just built this whole career now on being a lifelong learner and being able to join the dots between things. And that's one of my gifts.
Well, we've determined quite well that when you began university, you had some sort of an idea about the work and impact you wanted to have. What's your journey been professionally since you left university?
So I joined PwC, so PricewaterhouseCoopers. And for those of you who don't know, they are one of the big four kind of audit firms. And I joined in the audit practice. I had no idea what audit was, JBH, at that point. No. I quickly found out and I was like, this is not really my thing. However, I need to pass my exams and get first time passes. And I know that this is a gateway to future opportunity. And so I passed all my exams first time within 18 months. Again, love an exam, love structure. And then I was able to go out into clients and really observe like what impact I could make as an auditor. Now, I know that you probably have auditors in your organization, and they're
Boy,
not
do we.
necessarily not necessarily the people that you are the most excited to see when they come along, right?
Well, in my case, yes, but it was a learned experience. To your point.
Yeah. So I mean, I was not really used to having that reception, but in addition, I thought numbers, you can do numbers anywhere, but the subject matter that you are auditing or looking at, I figure you should have fun and excitement and joy with that. And so what I did was, as soon as I could depart, I started to look for roles in organizations that filled me with joy. And one of the things that I love is travel. And I love travel because it helps you to get out of your comfort zone. It forces you to engage with different people and different cultures if you choose to go further afield. I love meeting different people and understanding different people's perspective and points of view. And so my opportunity to join British Airways as soon as I qualified was just fantastic.
Well, and that brand has so much that I think they do
so
work to deliver on. Let me ask you this, girl.
Mhm.
So when I was growing up, books were like my treasures, okay? And I've
Mhm.
spoken oftentimes publicly about how my mom and dad would invest in books for us. And, you know, we can't take you off to fancy vacations, but if you can read, you can go there in your mind. And so I learned so much about so many places through the books that I read. And my interest was wide. It was similar to you, Patrice. When I became an adult and gained the ability to travel, whether it was through continental Europe or the UK, Asia, I'd already visited so many of those places through my reading that I had a sense of familiarity that married into the sense of awe and the sense of what nextness with it. Did you have a little bit of that, given that you too were an early reader? And I think you said you were an ambitious reader. Yeah.
Absolutely. But for me, it was more, when I started to read, I loved like teenage novels. So that was like my space of, and you know, it's like the US high school system and like the cheerleaders. I mean, that was the stuff that I was really into. And then I developed this almost obsession with the Oriental culture. So that was the culture that really pulled me in, from the food to the delicate nature of the artwork to the tea ceremony, the ceremoniousness of like how they pulled things together and the deep respect for the elders and tradition and hierarchy. And so actually I did skip a step. I took a year out between uni and PwC. I worked for 6 months and I traveled the world for 6 months. So it seemed fortuitous that when I finished my qualifications, then I joined an organization which allowed me to travel as well.
Beautiful, beautiful. Well, you are a trailblazer in concept of reverse mentorship, and leaving PwC and getting to where you are now. Share a little bit about that journey. And if you will, please also talk with us about what reverse mentorship truly means and the ways it can be beneficial.
Okay. I'll do a quick elevator pitch in terms of what happened from PwC. So then I went to British Airways. And British Airways, I was put on fast track management program within 2 months. I was promoted to a manager within 12 months, and I did 5 roles in 6 years. And this is a testament to the mentorship that I received, the belief that my manager had in me, but most importantly, my attitude of just bringing my best self every single day and having a real can-do attitude of, right, okay, I can see a problem. How can I solve that problem? How can I help? How can I assist? And that really has been the thread and the foundation throughout my whole career. I left British Airways and then went to Royal Mail, which is equivalent to USPS.
Mhm.
And that was when I kind of surpassed all my expectations. You know, each step you take, every time you take a step, like another level of comprehension opens up to you. I'm sure that you experienced the same thing, JBH, as you when you opened your first business, and then you expanded to the second branch, and then you expand, and your mind just opened. So me becoming a finance director was something I had never ever fathomed would happen to me. And I was in this position as, I think, the most senior Black person across the whole of the Royal Mail Group. Well, very credible, very authentic, and well educated to be in that role. So I was really comfortable in being that role. I'd worked really hard to be there. But there were some pinch me moments in that where I thought, wow, I'm really here. And then I got sent to Oxford. You know, these are all things that I would never have dreamed of before. But then it came to a point and I was close to burning out. It was really, really high pressure. And similar to, I think, the things that you've got in the USPS, very tight culture and lots of things to break through. And I got to the point where I was like, actually, what do I want my legacy to be? So I've surpassed what I thought I would be. But what does it take? What do I want to wake up to? What work brings me joy? And what legacy do I want to leave? At that same time, I did a coaching qualification. And this was because I looked around my senior leadership team table sometimes in finance, and I really wanted to pull out the emotional intelligence. I really wanted to not only be the only person that was thinking about things from that emotional intelligence lens point, and also from that people aspect. And this is where you'll see my career take a little bit of a turn, a pivot, because ultimately I tapped back into that psychology side of myself. So I'd got to a really good level from a finance perspective, and it was time for me to lean into that psychology side. What team did I want to lead? What legacies did I want to leave? How did I want people to feel working with me and for me? And I realized I got the biggest kicks from when my teams were really outperforming, doing their best, and I could see how I was impacting them and people around me. So did my coaching qualification, and I was like, okay, what do I want my legacy to be? And when anyone who's had the privilege of being coached recognizes the answers are inside you, and you're just asking a series of questions to get to your truth. And that's what a real coach does. And so during this process, I'm asking myself these questions. I'm learning to be a coach, but I'm also doing a lot of self-reflection to figure out, what does this next chapter look like for you, Patrice? And it was at that point I thought, right, actually, I want to build this coaching business. I get a lot of joy from helping other people. And this is what I really want to do. So I took the brave step. They were doing some reorganizations and they were going to move me to a different department. I said, I'm not sure that's my cup of tea. I'd like to try something else. And I had built up a relationship with someone at Virgin Atlantic from a role that I'd been for before, but I decided not to take. And this is the power of keeping your connections, keeping your networks, because no, that role wasn't right for me. But at the same time, when I was going through this, I tapped back into that network, and that person had a role which was a level that I maybe might not have considered before because it was a step back. But at that stage in my life, when I was like, actually, I want to build this business, I need the headspace to do that. The opportunity came up and I stepped into a role which was head of commercial finance, exactly the same role as I was doing at British Airways. And it meant I could go in there really confidently and know my stuff. But the most important thing about this move for me was that I joined an organization which allowed me to really lean into the organizational structure and legacy. And through that, I was able to work with the HR team and set up the first ever graduate finance program. So this is like your graduate internship. We didn't have one before. A fantastic brand such as Virgin Atlantic didn't have this. And I was the person that was instrumental in introducing that. The second thing was there is a program for women's development.
How did you get that introduced? How did you get that to happen?
So I asked a question and they said, no, we don't have one. And I said, why don't we have one? And they said, because we thought about it before, but we haven't really kind of had someone to galvanize and pulling things together. And I was as part of your development in finance, there's these kind of working groups that you're part of. And then I was on like the continuous learning and development one, because that's the thing I really enjoy. And I was like, how about we do this? And then I worked with the finance teams that had been there, in situ for a while, alongside HR, to build the program and the syllabus to be able to introduce a finance graduate program, which was like brilliant because we'd never had that before. Then, sorry.
Wonderful.
Yeah, sorry,
I
sorry.
just think that's wonderful. I mean, the spirit of innovation, the spirit of getting inside the psyche of a business, not just the person, and
Mm,
moving the needle forward in those areas you think need improvement are
mm.
brilliant. And what was the other one that you were about to talk about?
The women's development program. So historically, I say that HR is the conscience of the organization, and the women's development program, the facilitators were always in HR. And I asked the question, like, why is it only HR that are facilitators? Because it's, women's development and they want women role models. Surely we should tap into the amazing role models that we have across the business. And so I was the first non-HR person to be a facilitator for this women's development program. And now 90% of the facilitators are non-HR. I think it's just really important to have role models and examples from across the business, not just from a HR perspective. And then finally, the question that you actually asked me, which is, what is reverse mentoring and how did you get involved in it? So after kind of doing all of these other things across the organization, an opportunity came up when they wanted to pilot a reverse mentoring program. And reverse mentoring is where you have a senior leader who is mentored by someone who is underrepresented around that senior leadership team table. So this could be gender, age, ethnicity, disability, veteran status, basically whichever demographic or protected characteristic is not representative at the table. It's an opportunity for that leader to tap into an alternative viewpoint so they can make better decisions, right, from a wider vantage and viewpoint. So our CEO was very brave and said, look, I have no Black women in my inner circle or my work circle.
Was
And
this Richard Branson?
No, so this is Craig Krieger, the
Craig
previous,
Krieger.
the
Okay.
Virgin Atlantic CEO. And he was really brave about not having any Black women in his inner circle or his work circle. And so they asked me whether I would mind being a reverse mentor. Now, I'd spoken to Craig and presented to him on a number of occasions, and I wasn't nervous, but this was the first time someone wanted to speak to me, not because of what I did, but because of who I was.
Mm. Mm.
And that really hit a different note for me because I'm used to coming along, bringing my receipts in terms of this is what I've done. This is like my portfolio. This is what I'm really comfortable in doing. But this was me. And so that was a really powerful experience for me because he wanted to understand me, my growing up, my formative years. What was it that made me me? But most importantly, he wanted to build a more inclusive culture at Virgin Atlantic. And he wanted to understand whether there was anything within the culture or within society that he could potentially have some influence over to make it a more of an inclusive culture. And that was a beautiful experience. And that's how it all started. So then we ran a pilot program at Virgin Atlantic. I was the head mentor, so helping the other mentors come along. So to clarify, the underrepresented person is the mentor, the senior leader is the mentee, and there is a huge amount of work to be done to make sure that those roles are fulfilled in their truest forms. And what that means is, for me, being the mentor, recognizing that my lived experience is valid and that my voice carries weight and value, and what I have to say is valuable to that senior leader. And then for the senior leader, for them to kind of assume the position of a novice, I like to say, and they are then in an inquisitive and curious mode to really understand people who are different from them.
So, Patrice, then there is significant vulnerability within this context of reverse mentorship. It seems as though it requires more vulnerability on both parts of than the traditional ways we think about mentorship. Have I got that right?
Absolutely. Definitely from the leader perspective, there's a huge amount of pressure on leaders to have all the answers and to know what to do. And if the past few years have taught us anything, is that that's impossible. There's so much movement going on in the world, but also conversations and things that have happened were not permissible in the workplace before. And now everything has moved into the world of work. So leaders are having to have some deep, brave conversations that they perhaps couldn't or wouldn't have had previously. And so it's really tapping into that. And so the first thing you really honed into that, JBH, is really around the psychological safety that needs to be established to make sure that both the leader, the mentee, and the mentor feel safe to share their stories. And when I say psychological safety, what I mean is sharing one's viewpoints and opinions without fear of reprise. So this means coming to the table and us assuming that we've both got the right amount of the correct and positive intent, but also in addition to that, we're both coming to the table knowing that we have this growth mindset and we want to know better and we want to do better. We also need to then recognize the work that we both individually need to do that. And what I mean is, in these situations, oftentimes the underrepresented person can bear a great deal of burden on educating the person who is the leader. And through the work that I have done and the research that I've completed, it's really important that we set the foundation. I spend a lot of time setting the foundation to make sure that perhaps the gaps in knowledge the leader is looking to address, they've done their part in coming to the table with a certain amount of knowledge to be able to really drive and gain value from the person who is being the mentor in this relationship. So even if I just flip it around a bit, if you are a senior leader and someone is coming to you to get mentored and they want some advice on something, you'd expect them to do a little bit of work, if not a lot of work, before they come to sit with you. You're not expected to give them the whole A to Z of this is how you need to do X, Y, and Z. You expect them to have done some work. And so this is how I replay it to some of the leaders when we're having these conversations. If there is a form of underrepresentation that you are interested in finding more out about, make sure that you have done your basic work and you understand, for example, the lay of the land in whichever part of the world that you're in. You also understand how that community fares and sits within your organization as well. So when you're having conversations with them, you can relate it to the facts, numbers, figures, etc., but also the sentiment around it. So you're not wholly putting all of this pressure on this individual who is already placing or having a burden of being underrepresented. But on top of that, you've done the work, because the aim of this relationship is twofold. You want to learn and understand so that you can make better business decisions, so that you can build an inclusive culture where everyone feels like they can belong and bring their whole selves to work. I assume that this is your intention as a leader, because we have found time and time again that 69% of people feel like they are quite quitting at work. They are feeling like they don't belong at work, and they are feeling frustrated with the lack of connection in the workplace. And so there's numerous studies that have been done on this post and during the pandemic, and therefore a sense of belonging, understanding and inclusion is essential for businesses to survive, because we're seeing this attrition rate, or worse still, quiet quitting, where we've got employees in positions where they're not giving their all or their full self because they don't feel like they belong. So this is one of the challenges, is that I know that reverse mentoring helps to address, and this is something that I work on with leaders quite frequently nowadays.
From the beginning of your company, you had immediate and continued success with reverse mentoring, dynamic outcomes for clients.
Yeah.
You did a bit of a pivot I want you to talk about. But before we go there, your book, Reverse Mentoring, Removing Barriers and Building Belonging in the Workplace, became an instant hit. And it's a testimony to your thought leadership. What are some of the key concepts that you explore within your book? Everybody I know is going to go get it after this podcast who doesn't already have it. But let's talk about that a little bit before we move into how you actually, what some call pivot, which, looking at what I think I understand about your business, was more of an elevation and expansion of those services, how those basic principles can transform or transcribe into other areas. So let's go to reverse mentoring and some of those key concepts that you explored in there.
Thank you, JBH. So first of all, people are trying to understand what is reverse mentoring and why is it important in the world right now. So I touched on it slightly in the space around inclusivity. But for me, you know, when we talk about the organization and meritocracy and who is allowed to thrive or permitted to thrive in those organizations, really what we're trying to do is level that playing field, and we're trying to allow everybody that same amount of access to opportunities to be able to tap into that. So the first part of the book is giving some global stats around this is why reverse mentoring is really important right now, and this is the state of play in terms of why you should be worried if you don't have a reverse mentoring program. That's the first thing. The second piece is around what do you need in order for a reverse mentoring program to be successful? And that lies around a foundation of trust. Through the research, I found that organizations where reverse mentoring was really sticky and really successful was founded on an organization which had a high level of employee engagement and a high level of trust. And that's because the organization has delivered on what they said they would deliver on in the past, and individuals and employees therefore feel like, actually, this little discretionary effort or this additional initiative, we're going to see fruits from our labor if we invest our time in this. Where I don't see it working so well is those organizations where the trust is a little bit rocky, and that trust has been eroded over time, and where the organization hasn't necessarily done what they said they would do. And this really came through the research in the pandemic, where, there were lots of organizations asking lots of questions, doing lots of listening groups. And a lot of the feedback that I had was those organizations that were maybe doing it responsively or reactively, as opposed to genuinely, were the ones that really struggled with having reverse mentoring stick. So really understanding that foundation is important. And I've said this a few times, but I don't personally work with those organizations which have that low level of trust and still want to implement the reverse mentoring programs, because my intention is the protection of underrepresented individuals and amplifying their voices to make sure that they're heard. And if we're implementing something on rocky ground, it's like building a house on a sand, right? It needs to be quite solid. So I might do a bit of work with them beforehand to get there. And then
Patrice,
yes.
Patrice, finish your thought. And then, if you will, imagine this conversation were a reverse mentoring session, and walk through with me what types of questions you might ask of me as the senior and as the junior person in the relationship.
Okay. So then the rest of the book really goes through some practical examples. So what's the role of human resources or the program lead? Because someone needs to run it. It can't just be an individual. The mentor's responsibility. So as a junior individual, what's your responsibility for protecting yourself? And what's your responsibility for sharing in a way that's going to help drive the organization forward? The mentee's responsibility, doing the work, as I said, listening and leaning into that relationship, but most importantly, being accountable for certain actions that you will take as a result of the program. And for me, it's all about acting on those insights and actually having a plan. It can't just be a drop in the ocean. It's not a silver bullet. This has to be part of an overall program plan on inclusivity, because ultimately it can't just be singular, because it needs structure and foundations in order for it to resonate throughout the whole organization and for it to have an impact. And then the key is continuous learning and engagement to move forward. So that's in a nutshell the tenets of the book. And my intention with the book was really to make sure that anybody could take this book going forward and implement a psychologically safe and sustainable reverse mentoring program, because there's no reason for anyone not to.
And while I enjoy highlighting the pages in it, and I've got it looks like a bingo card now. I do think that downloading it would be very handy for everybody listening right now, regardless of where they are in organizations, because so much of the principles in the book, I found, Patrice, whether it was your intention or not, are applicable in other life circumstances outside of the enterprise or organization as well.
Okay, thank you, JBH.
So if this
your
were
question,
a reverse mentoring session,
okay, if it was
what would you ask me?
Okay, so if as the mentor in the situation, and so I would also say that in the reverse mentoring relationship, as it would be normally, then I'd expect the mentee, so JBH, for you to lead the conversation and say, actually, Patrice, this is what I really want to learn from you. So I'm going to give you some questions. So I would ask you to ask me, for example, Patrice, we have just implemented a new program or a new policy in X, Y, and Z. I've heard different things on the grapevine about how it's been received. Can you talk to me about your experience and like what you really like about the policy, and if you had an opportunity to influence it, what you might do differently? So that I'm going straight into the practical parts of how this relationship could work.
And I like that you're not asking me as the junior person in the conversation to talk about other persons or other people's perceptions or engagement.
No,
You're
no.
coming directly to me, which validates my reason to be there.
Absolutely. And what I do say, though, for the really good mentors, once you've established a relationship, what naturally happens is people will know that you are the mentor and you have the ear of someone who's senior. So naturally, people will come to you to say, oh, can you talk to them about this, or can you mention that? And you have to play that role really carefully, because you're in this trusted, safe space. And actually, those really good mentors are already tapped into groups. So they can say, actually, this is what my viewpoint is. But on top of that, I can also give you some guidance and some feedback from a wider population. So always start with self, because this is all about validating you and your lived experience in your life. So you lean into that experience and you own it fully. And then to add further context, you can then add a little bit more around it if you have the opportunity to do so. But really start with self, and sharing from self first and foremost is really important. And then from the other perspective, if I was to come to speak to you, once I've established a relationship with you and I get that you understand me and that you can take the challenge. So, I talk about psychological safety, and psychological safety is built over time. And there's the first part, which is like, are you around the table? Are you safe to ask questions, to learn? Are you safe to contribute your viewpoints and opinions? And then the final stage is challenge. So for me, I would probably come to you and say, JBH, I noticed that we implemented this policy. I'm not waiting for your invitation. I'm coming to you as in, I've seen this, and I've seen that there's not a graduate finance program. And I think this is a bit of a challenge for our organization. This is what I think the challenge is, and this is what I think we can do to address it. Can we talk about what a potential solution could look like?
And then, Patrice, so often leaders, including myself and you, I believe, are looking for data to support decisions we make, even if we are looking on the more humane side and inclusion side of it. Data is what supports it. And if those happen to be publicly held organizations, as were the ones you mentioned working with, there is a fidelity to the shareholder that's important as well. So your advice to the junior person would be to bring data in to support what they're saying, to quicken the listening of the senior leader. Yes?
Absolutely. But what I would also say is some organizations that I've worked with, those junior individuals don't have access to, they've got their experience and they've got a gauge of it, but they don't have access to that information. And so what I try to encourage in these relationships is the sharing of that information. So the corroboration of it, but also you can take someone's lived experience and that can plant a seed with you, JBH, so that you can go back to your team and say, this is what I've heard, and I think we might have a problem here. Can you look at the data? Can I see the data, and can you pull out any trends which supports or corroborates this? So I think it can work from both sides, but
yes,
I think that there's a lot of pressure for that almost business case to be formed. But I would say more times than not, that junior individual doesn't have access to that level of information to be able to corroborate it, but they've just got a feeling and they are the recipient or the endpoint of it.
Well, one more question before we go into the pivot that you made, or the, as I like to say, the elevation and expansion of your business recently. And that is, there's so many celebrities writing autobios right now. And, it's almost as though they're taking us into their deepest therapy sessions. And I don't have to mention the names of the ones. I'm sure many are coming to mind for all of us right now. But they are in some ways reversing the legacy process of how others writing about them were. And they're sharing things that might have been taboo not too long ago. You busted down doors in how junior and senior executives could work together similarly toward good, not judging and nor predicting how these bios are impacting the people who are writing them. They're certainly having an impact on those who are reading them, to the point of examining their own lives. Do you think they've got it right, this big transparency in print?
I would say that people have a right to share their stories. And what I really love about this era, and social media has its negatives and positives, but actually individuals are now able to own their own stories without, and how they choose to articulate it is up to them, right? As opposed to other individuals having the right to do the autobiographies, which are not signed off, all the press writing things about them in different tabloid magazines, which may not be a true reflection of what they are or who they say they are. So I think there's a thin line between celebrities and people portraying things that they would like the public to see them as, but that's their story and their responsibility to share. So what I really like about the era that we're in right now is people are sharing their truth, or how they portray their truth. And I think we're all responsible for our truth, right? And I don't think that, you know, in the past, other people, the access has been so restricted that people haven't had the ability to tell their own stories. And if there's one story in the world that we have the right to tell, it's our own story.
The thing is, when we tell our own stories, we are often bringing other people's stories into that conversation who may not have wanted to share or are not ready there yet.
That's
so
very
it's an
true.
interesting time where we
Yeah.
exist. I mean, I think there is even currently buzz on the internet and in social media around Saturday Night Live and whether they actually lifted someone. I think his first name is Bryant. I don't remember his last name, but I want to be thoughtful when I'm mentioning things. That he had pulled from a Sex and the City line. And, you know, that show was years ago around Britney's relationship with Justin Timberlake. And so, you know, you give rise to that. So whether it's the grittier side or the, you know, tempestuous side, or whether it's that side that causes us to examine and reflect within ourselves, it's certainly a season where everybody has a platform, huh?
Yeah, it is. It is. And I think everyone's adjusting to what that looks like now in terms of where do we listen to and where is the source of the truth, right? We're all, if you're that way inclined, you're trying to figure out the truth from all the truth at that point in time or where it is.
Well, you know, when we think about that, you certainly have some specific success stories or noteworthy examples that demonstrate how reverse mentoring has been skillfully implemented in practice. Could you just share a little bit with our family some of those?
Of course. My favorite example is Estee Lauder. So Fabrizio has implemented reverse mentoring for about 8 years now, and he's the CEO of Estee Lauder companies. And he's really committed to it because not only from his employee base, which has a high percentage of Gen Zs, but from the customer base. So you're looking at the fast moving beauty goods industry. And ultimately, he recognized in order to move with the times, he needed to listen to the people who were his customers, as well as his employees. And that is the best example of reverse mentoring that I have seen, because he's been doing it consistently for 8 years. Reverse mentoring actually started with General Motors and General Electric and Jack Welch. And he implemented it from a digitization perspective in the 90s. And this has come around full circle again, right? Because we thought that was the big digitization. And now we've got like another era of it. So we are seeing organizations now really leaning into reverse mentoring from a technology point of view, not just from a consumer point of view. And I think, Janice, that leads on to the next question, which is about the pivot, right?
Yes, absolutely. I'm so excited to get here, and laying the platform for that has been brilliant.
So JBH, as you said, we have been really working through this. And my first experience of reverse mentoring was obviously as a Black female. Then as we worked through the pandemic and I gathered lots more information, I tapped into it from a gender, from an ethnicity, from an age, veteran status and disability perspective, and the cross-section intersectionality of all of those. But the resounding thing that has come out from my clients most recently is the challenge that we have with the multiple generations that we have in the workforce. So this is looking at reverse mentoring from an age perspective. So we're looking at the Gen Z population as a whole, because we have seen the different characteristics of Gen Zs as a totality, and I'm going to make some generalizations. But what I love about this generation is that they are so open about what their expectations are for the organizations that they work with, the ethical standards that they expect those organizations to uphold, and also what they want from the world of work. So it's really turned it into more of a democracy. And this generation is giving everybody permission to ask for what they want and lean into those experiences in terms of, this is what we want our work to look like. And so most recently, the work that I've really been focused on is looking at this intergenerational lens, not only at Gen Zs, but looking at how, we have 5 generations in the workforce now. 5. The first time, like, in really good proportional chunks, we have 5 generations in the workforce. So that means that a policy that maybe you had previously, which was a blanket policy for example, a lot of things, I don't consult on this, but we talk about the retirement policies, for example, or childcare policies, or time off policies. All these policies that were once blanket, we now need to add a little bit of flexibility in with them, because they're not necessarily, those benefits aren't necessarily attractive to all the different generations that you have in the workforce. And that's a really practical example of how you can use a reverse mentoring relationship. We've used it one-on-one, we've used it in a group setting to really understand and listen to members of the different generations, so that you can build policies which are going to be more applicable to the wider population. And this is, the biggest thing that we're seeing coming out at the moment, because the Gen Z generation in particular tend to have no issues in moving jobs more frequently. And when people move jobs most frequently, it's a bit different. So just to clarify, in the US, you have different employee labor laws than in the UK. In the UK, it's usually a standard 4-week notice period. If you're more senior in an organization, it's 3 to 6 months even. I had a 6-month notice period at British Airways, right? Which is very different to the UK. And that proves different problems. But ultimately, when you have a lot of attrition within the organization, then you have to recruit again, then you need to retain again. This is a significant weight on the organization, not just from in turn, like bringing them in and exiting them, but it takes a toll on the team, because in the meantime, as people come in and out, then other people need to take up that responsibility. But most importantly, you are losing out on productivity. You're losing out on productivity.
This leans in very, very closely to the work that we do. And oftentimes it's one company operating in different countries under different laws and still managing how they create equity in opportunity and equity in expectation across the global organization. Given your expertise, what guidance do you typically provide to organizations considering implementing reverse mentoring programs that are going to help them drive organizational growth and development in the ways you're suggesting the benefits thereof exist?
So we work through to really understand where it sits in their overall inclusion plan, because ultimately I need to understand, where are your gaps? So is it attrition? Is it a particular group? And then we lean in and focus on that group as the potential pool of mentors. And then we need to make sure the mentees are teed up in terms of what the challenges are, so they can make the most use and value out of that relationship. So it really is not a blanket approach. It really looks at, where do you see the gaps, and where do you need to add a little bit more of a human interaction to help understand what are some of the underlying issues that we've got within these areas. And then that allows them to build a plan which is human first. I always say plan which is human first, and then we can build the system and structures around the fact that we might need to change a policy, or actually we need to change the structure of this role, or these roles, if we pull them together, this is going to be a better outcome for us. So it's that mixture between the data and the human approach that I really encourage the outcome to be.
This is beautiful, because it seems as though, and correct me if I err in my perspective, that you are delivering a program that allows for localized improvement that creates that huge global benefit for an organization. And when I say localized, I'm not just speaking of the human touch you said, which means it's in this moment now in this organization. I'm also speaking of the readiness of the leadership you're working with, or the trust and culture of the environment that you're going into. You mentioned earlier in our conversation, Patrice, that you basically do something that I've taught our people to do, and that is we select the customers we work with versus parrot our services and please, will you buy this one, will you buy that one? That's been a choice we've made as an organization that others in our industry may have a different fit or approach to. It
Mm.
really is based on the work you're doing and the intricate and intimate engagement it requires of an organization, uh, a prerequisite, huh?
It does. And you articulate that so perfectly. It's the time and effort from both my side and from the leader's side to really feed into this beautiful thing that could be a really successful reverse mentoring relationship. And I do say, like, there are, again, other providers who will come in and do a blanket piece, but my sweet spot is because I've sat around these senior leadership team tables for like over 10 years in a commercial aspect. I have an emotional intelligence and a coaching qualification, and I am
Mhm.
the world renowned leader on reverse mentoring. I can sit
Mhm.
around that table and give you real talk in terms of this is how it's really going to work. And I can give you advice from a commercial perspective as well. So, not diving into the business case, but actually, let's talk about how this is going to come through, not just from a psychology perspective, but from a real practical perspective as well. And I think when myself and my team really dive in and lean into these relationships, we need to make sure that there's a that there is a high probability of success of the program. And
Building trust and rapport is crucial in any mentoring relationship. I've seen that over the years that I've engaged in business and in personal relationships as well,
yeah.
professional personal relationships. Patrice, share with us your insights on how mentors and mentees can develop a strong foundation of trust, especially in the context of reverse mentoring.
When the mentor and mentee first speak, I ask them to kind of meet off campus if possible, if it's a face-to-face piece, and I ask the mentee to lead that I ask the mentee to lead that relationship. And the reason I do that is because even though I've put you in this relationship and the roles are reversed, ultimately the mentee still holds the power. This senior leader still holds the power. So in any building of a relationship, I ask the mentee to share first. So share their story, not their work life, share their story. And, people meet you at their level of expectation. So if I come into this and I share my background, I share my story, and then I talk about the different twists and turns that my career has taken and the good parts and the bad parts, and really how I arrive at where I am today. I'm dusting off the veneer. I'm taking off the shiny coating at the top, and I'm really getting real with my mentor, because I want them to see me as a human first and a person first. Forget my title. I'm trying to strip away the title first and foremost. And then that allows the mentor to lean into that relationship to share a little bit more about their story. And I want to say it's a dance, because you're sharing and you're leaning into it. You're actively listening. You're affirming that individual, and you're listening with unconditional positive regard. Because what I mean by that is you're not judging anything that they're saying. You're taking it all on board. Nothing is a challenge, because they're sharing their lived experience with you, and that is their truth. So you have to listen to that.
For the senior executive who has historically likely had the armor of the senior executive in an organization where they ask the questions and expect the answers. This can be quite a new experience to have the vulnerability of being asked by the junior outside of how to do or what to do, because it becomes a bit more personal if that senior executive is not coached or taught what they're actually seeking to do and given tips or education on how to achieve that. And so I can imagine that lots of executives may see this as a bigger risk than the reward will offer for them personally. What are some of the common challenges that you've seen executives encounter, and how did your coaching empower them to overcome these? I ask this because we have senior people I know, and some I know personally, who are listening to this podcast at some point between now and the next time you and I even see each other. So let's talk a little bit about the reality of the risk or the perceived threat or discomfort that senior executives may have, which likely are the majority of your listeners right now.
Yep. Great question. So first and foremost, it's the risk of not having the answers. So they're entering into this relationship, they're exposing themselves to a junior individual who's going to ask them questions and they may not have the answers to. And these might be around quite sensitive topics when it comes to underrepresentation as an umbrella within the organization. So we'll go through the challenges and then we'll talk through what mitigations we have put in place to help them address those. I think the second piece is where organizations are. I've worked for some organizations which thrive on the hierarchical nature of those organizations, right? So the hierarchy is in place to protect the different levels. And when that is stripped back, that makes leaders feel really uncomfortable, because actually you're just removing all of the things that I've built up and almost the protections that I have in place. And that's not necessarily an individual choice, but it's just how the organization is, and that's how it has been built in the past. And so that's a really big challenge that we have. The third challenge is, you know, what is, when the reverse mentoring program is not teed up correctly, then and it's done as a reactive piece, and you'll see that come out through the research, is they're doing it as a reaction because it's a new initiative that people are talking about and we think we should just do a program. But the teeing up of like, why are we doing it in the first place? Where does it sit in our overall inclusion plan? What are the expectations of me? Are we just going to sit and have a coffee and have a great conversation, but there's not really, I'm not really sure what I'm meant to do with the conversation that I have. How do I feed it back? Not having that accountability piece is a big challenge. And then I think finally, just when things go wrong, the leader dealing with that in an emotionally sensitive way as well. And so part of the coaching that we do before we onboard, when we're onboarding our leaders, and we do it with our mentors too. So, but I'll focus on the leaders, which is getting to a place of psychological safety, working with the program leads to ensure that we're clear as to where this reverse mentoring sits in the overall inclusion piece. And those really great companies actually have it linked to the individual's objectives as well. And that means that actually they are looking at that individual to be a role model in the inclusion space by establishing and running successful reverse mentoring relationships. And for me, that doesn't mean it's just a 6-month thing. It is building that culture of inclusion so that you can see that leadership behavior change over time, of like not being so hierarchical to inviting viewpoints and opinions from people of difference. Because we all know these senior leadership team tables often have a similarity bias. And this is what it really tapped in for me. A similarity bias exists because we feel comfortable as humans with people who are more similar to ourselves. And the more that people are similar to ourselves, the more we trust them. And if we trust them more, we give them more opportunities because we feel like they can handle it, right? But this is just a circle, because that just further perpetuates those examples, and those experiences further perpetuate each other. But then when you bring in reverse mentoring, you bring in other inclusion practices, you're developing a close relationship with someone of difference. And then you can tap in the same way as Craig and I found our similarities. You can tap into those similarities and you get to know someone a little bit more on a personal level. And then when you get to know them on that personal level, you'll say, actually, you know what? I had a conversation with Patrice. I think she might be good for this experience. Or why don't we ask her viewpoint and opinion? And then people of difference are invited into the room around the table and they're included more. And then before you know, this is my utopia. Before you know, in 10 years' time, I want to go back to all my clients and I want to see those senior leadership team tables being so much more representative. And they say that actually, do you know what? It was because I had a reverse mentoring relationship. It opened my mind up, not to just that person, but to that alternative viewpoint and way of thinking. And I always liken it to that growth mindset. You know, that growth mindset, we can talk about growth mindset or the 10X, right? We talk about it in terms of sales and operations. Let's like make 10X more sales. Let's get that operation slick. But when it comes to matters of like the heart and the mind, we get stuck really easily. And so reverse mentoring is one of those tools that we're going to use more frequently going forwards to get people a bit more unstuck. And when they get unstuck with one thing, other things will flow around it as well.
We could talk forever and ever about this, and it is so beautiful to see the success you're having that's occurred for companies, but more emphatically for people. Thank you so much. You know, we talk about success, though. How do you define success in your own everyday life?
Success for me is having choices and options. And I think I've got to a really amazing place in my life where I get to wake up every day and do something that I really love. And I do something that I know that I'm impacting other people's lives. And I wake up and I'm incredibly grateful. So for me, that's success.
Beautiful, beautiful. Um, you know, getting there, you shared earlier with us what your life was like as a youngster through
Mm-hmm.
university. During that course, have there been people in your personal life who have
Mm-hmm.
inspired and guided you on your path to success, or, you know, those family mentors or hug circle mentors who you're comfortable to go at risk a little bit or are more transparent yourself and share with us?
Yeah, absolutely. So I mentioned her, my first manager at British Airways was someone called Rebecca Napier, who then turned out to be the CFO. She had a belief in me that she put me on a leadership course. With me being in the business for 6 weeks, she nominated me for like a leader of tomorrow course. And that meant that I had so much time for her, but also I knew that she trusted me and I didn't want to disappoint her. So that was a really big thing for me. My first mentor, which was someone called Marcia Murphy, who it was the first time I ever had a mentor. I had no idea what a mentor was. I'd never had the privilege of having one before. And the time that she gave me and the alternative viewpoint and perspective that I had was incredible. I had a manager at Royal Mail who allowed me to fail and allowed me to, and when I say fail, he allowed me safe learning opportunities. And I was really open with him about my desire to learn. And we had a great relationship. He allowed me to step into a bigger space, but he also left the door open, or I left the door open for him to give me feedback so I could be better. And I love that space. And then I would say that people, as I've got older and more experienced, like I read a lot. And so people that I don't actually know, I become my mentors. So, you know, people like you really inspire me. Brené Brown really inspires me. Adam Grant, a really great author, really inspires me. TD Jakes really inspires me from my spiritual well-being. And so whilst I might not know them personally, they have been like my mentors because I tap into their learning and their experiences to really lean in and make sure that I can not make, you know, the same mistakes, but learn from them and they can become the ceiling, which is my floor.
You know, the wisdom and guidance of mentors holds immense value. And as with you, I've had direct and indirect mentors throughout my life. Some of them have been people who have not had business careers, some of them have not had far educational opportunities, yet their wisdom through living and observing have given tremendous impact to me and how I work. As an exceptional leader yourself, though, there are qualities and skills that I know you believe are essential for aspiring leaders in today's rapidly evolving business landscape. Talk a little bit about that for us, if you will.
So one of the things that I really believe in is that you need to stay ready. And I say that because you don't know when the opportunities are going to come, but I don't believe in doing anything half-heartedly. And what I mean by that is I'll put my all into it and I'll make sure I prepare adequately, because you just never know when people are looking, and you want to always make sure that you're putting your best foot forward. So no, but it's true. Like,
no, I'm laughing because in our family we say you don't have to get ready if you stay ready.
There we go. And I've like working for yourself and being an entrepreneur, but most importantly, when I was in organizations, everything, my longer story, which we'll have to have another conversation about, is about how each opportunity has opened up a different door for me. And those closed doors have been fine. At the time they really hurt, but recognizing and being able to bounce back from some of those closed doors and recognizing when your path is your path and your flow is your flow, and really leaning into that is really important.
Well, I agree with you there, Patrice, because, and I'm glad that you're sharing these tips and techniques on that can, you know, really aid us in keeping it together while so much is happening on the world scene. I mean, whether it's war, AI impacting careers and how we work, or simply navigating technology in ways that allow or promote authenticity. Remember when authenticity was that big word before COVID?
Yeah.
So I really don't mind if before we go to 4 for 4, you go ahead and lean in into some of that. Prep us for our next big conversation.
Yeah. I would also say that, coming up as a leader, there were some opportunities that I was given that I just leaned into. And there is something that is even more important now as I'm doing this work, which is the day you plant the seed is not the same day that you see the fruit. And this keeps me motivated when, there may be like weeks where things are just not maybe going according to plan, but I'm still turning up, I'm still being diligent. And then there will be weeks where everything just flows. And so, we talk about being okay whether you're a base or a bound. And for me, it's like having the tenacity and having like the will to keep on going, especially when you're an entrepreneur, because there's no one around me saying that you should do this, Patrice, you should do that, you're off track. It's only me that's really trying to self-motivate. Well, it is self-motivating myself. So I think as a leader, remembering that is super important. And then, obviously I've got to finish on the Maya Angelou quote, which is, people won't always remember exactly what you said, but they will remember how you made them feel. And for me, when I'm on that rocking chair, looking out into the beach, and when I'm an older person, I want to know that the people and the lives that I touched, that I had a positive influence on them. That's what's going to really help me to sleep really well at night. And that's what still keeps me going today.
You quoted Maya, but you spoke beautifully the teaching of T.D. Jakes as well, who you said is one of your indirect mentors. One thing you didn't mention that I think is so beautiful about you in this advice giving moment is your not simply discipline, but enjoyment of mental, spiritual, and physical health. And I've observed you keep it together in a way that has had the people directly around you put something back on the buffet table and select something different, or take the steps instead of the elevator. So, I mean, I can't imagine that you're not sharing that out loud as well.
Thank you, JBH. So I am, and this has been a thread for me throughout life, but really, during the pandemic, the one thing that really, well, two things that really helped me, which was prayer in the morning, religiously, but a Bible study, not just a prayer. Like there's a Bible study. Joyce Meyer, she's my friend. She doesn't know it yet, but she is. And then a journal practice in the morning and the evening. So that takes care of my mental. But my physical, if I don't get up and move in the morning, it's not going to be a great day. Unless it's like a real intentional, I need a rest day. I work out 4 or 5 times a week, and I have a dog, which means that I have to get out and get fresh air at least 3 times a day.
Who, by the way, is welcome to our big conversation the next time.
Yes, he is. So that balance between mental and physical health is so important, especially when the world around you is moving and mobilizing, but also the deep inner work that I've had to do when things around me and really close to me were really unstable, meant that I had to really lean in and tap into that to get aligned with myself and to get aligned with God, but also keep my mental and my physical spirit high.
And you tend to treat your body as a temple, and you feed it what you consider well foods for your own personal biology and your own response to energy and health and fitness around what you intake.
Absolutely. So I'm a pescatarian. I do love a bit of cake, but I think you've discovered I don't eat chocolate.
I can't believe it. I mean, we're so aligned until you don't eat dark chocolate.
Don't eat any chocolate. But I am partial to a nice cake. But yeah, I think what you feed yourself, and the more we understand about food and how it impacts us and the quality of the food that we have around us. JB, I'm putting into existence that one day I'm going to have like my own farm to table Airbnb or home in the Caribbean, where everything is like farmed on the land and we have fresh fruit and vegetables, and it's just pure from the roots of the island,
that kind of like I grew up in North Carolina.
Yeah.
But that was because we didn't have the money and the access to stores that would give us the type of food we needed. So by default, we lived your dream life.
And this is the full circle.
Yeah. It also leads us to 4 for 4.
Mm,
So I'm going to ask you 4 questions.
okay.
You'll give me 4 answers. There are
Yeah.
no wrong answers. And
Okay.
the first is, you get, Patrice, to invite anyone you wish to dinner from present to back through historic
Ooh,
time.
okay.
Who's at your dinner table and why?
Okay. So I recently, what I know that people might have different views about it, but I recently watched the Cleopatra documentary series on Netflix. And I have this deep fascination with ancient Egypt. And I think that, as a female leader, there were so many qualities that she depicted that I would love to sit and have a conversation of. I mean, obviously it was dramatized. So I'd like to really understand from the root, what was it about her leadership which made her so singularly amazing, not to be repeated. I would love to learn about that, because I think especially now we're leaning into a lot of feminine leadership energy. So historically it's like, actually you need to emulate the masculine in order to be a great leader. What I'm loving at the moment is the deep feminine energy and women allowing to be them full selves as a female and leaning into that feminine energy
Do
without
you
having to
see a,
assimilate.
excuse me for cutting you off.
Yeah,
Do
yeah.
you see a contrast or more of a similarity between Cleopatra and, say, your own country's Boudica?
I would say I haven't looked into Boudica enough to be able to give a fair example, a fair evaluation of that.
She was definitely a woman who, I think, the European
Mm.
uh, 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 history promotes as having been very fierce and warlike and
Oh,
leadership.
Boadicea.
And
Yeah.
her
Yes,
statue
it
is
was
right there in
incredibly.
London
Yes,
for all
yes.
to
Sorry,
hear.
yeah, I do. Yeah. So
Uh-huh.
yeah, that was definitely more masculine than feminine in that aspect.
Mm-hmm.
Um, then the other three are three. It's not intentional, but they so happen to be three females, and these ones are alive. So one would be Beyonce. I have loved to see her evolve from where she started off in Destiny's Child to what she is right now. And her most recent tour, which has basically generated enough income as a small country, is just a feat in itself. So her constant commitment to excellence and what that drive, I'm really interested to find out and understand more about. Oprah, clearly very humble beginnings, but continues to still push and drive and build out to give back to community. But that community aspect of hers was very prevalent and present from quite a young age. And so really sitting with her to understand that motivation and drive around that would be really interesting. And then Michelle Obama, because I love how educated and gracious she is, while still being the right hand or left hand of Barack. And she does that with so much grace and poise, but also she's a fierce leader within herself as well. And I think she really dances that line between her being an incredibly supportive wife, but really standing on her own 2 feet as well as being feeding back to the community and the wider community, and just being a really good example of what a great partnership could look like, especially when you've got this whole piece around independence as a female and what that looks like. But also I think she's just done that really beautifully. So I would love to have
You bring up a point that I think is so beautiful in any relationship, male or female, just spouse or significant other. Bernie and I were at an intercompany event, and one of our senior execs said to him, "Oh, I love the way you support JBH to do her own thing and still take care of you." And his response was so beautiful, and he's Yorkshire born, so it was going to be so real as well. Was, um, I take the lead from my wife, and I love it. He asked the question, but my dear, why would you see one as being opposite the other and think it amazing when I consider them to be essential to each other? And I think that's where that energy happens when you see these couples who work really well together, perchance they're looking at, you spoke to your attitude being so important to the opportunities you got. I
Mm.
think attitude and perspective are the new app, okay?
Mm.
AP,
Mm.
because your
I'm writing
attitude,
that down.
right? But his perspective was from the day I met him. I don't know how early in his life it began. I have a
Mm.
sense a lot of it was from his own parenting, who seemed to operate that way. I knew his mother. His dad had passed away when I met him. But
Mm.
that energy in that home and in that family at large was that you need strong individuals in order to create a
Mm.
soft and safe space for
Mm.
couples. And
Mm.
so that's just the energy we took into ours. And you know, my
Mm.
respect and my love
Mm.
for my parents. I
Mm.
think you're splendidly on top of it when you nail it about how you see Michelle Obama. And I believe you have it innately in your power to move forward in your relationships as you develop them or it going forward. But that
Thank you,
moves us
JBH.
to two for four.
Okay.
Music. What four pieces
Mm.
or artists are you listening to right now, and why?
Okay. So 5 years ago, I discovered a genre of music which I had heard in the background. So, for background, everyone, in the Caribbean, there's a little bit of a competition with music, as well as food, as well as islands, as well as beaches. And I come from Jamaica,
Kind of
so there's
like East Coast, West Coast rap.
yeah, basically. So in the Caribbean, we have reggae, ragga, that's from Jamaica, but we also have from the other islands something called soca. And I discovered soca about 5 years ago because it's this music, it's like really rhythmic, very bouncy, not like the relaxed Bob Marley or the heavy beats of ragga. And I discovered soca. And since I've discovered soca, it's been like a new life for me. So there's two artists. One's called Kez, he's my favorite. The other is called Machel Montana. He's my other favorite. And they just bring sunshine to my life. Like you listen to the music, you can't help but smile, right? The other music that I listen to in the morning and I start my day with, and I'm going to give you more than four, but it's affirmation music. And the two artists that I love dearly are Londrell and Tony Jones. And these are like positive affirmations that you can listen to throughout the day or first thing in the morning. I like the clarity and the peace and the sounds that it brings. And it helps with my prayer and my journaling because it just helps you the calm before the storm before you enter that day, you know? So I deeply, deeply love those. And then I do love Jill Scott. I saw her in the summer. It was her, I think it was the 25th anniversary of Jill Scott. I can't believe it's been 25 years, but she is phenomenal and such a light. So music for me is lightness. There's not a day that goes past in this house that there is not some music playing in the background and me really badly trying to sing along to it. But yeah, those are my 4 for 4.
So JBH, aside to Nathan and Sarah, we got to make sure we put this playlist up on
Yeah.
our 10 to listen to for the end of for the holiday season.
Okay.
Let's move to books, going 3 for 4. What are the
Okay.
4 books you highly recommend to our family, and why?
Okay. So going in the hard books first, one of my first leadership books I read was called Originals by Adam Grant. And it really challenged me to think about what type of leader I wanted to be. And I think I've had this book for almost 10 years. But when I was trying to just, I've got almost catapulted into leadership really soon, earlier on in my career. And then I saw all these different leadership styles. And I was like, okay, I know which ones are kind of like, which ones I definitely don't want to emulate. But me trying to find my authentic leadership style was really important to me. The second, from a faith perspective, is obviously the Bible and everything that is driven from that, and actually the most important. But I love the modern forms, and I love Joel, Joyce, TD, Stephen. These are all individuals that help me to translate the Bible in today's form, and I love it because it's just so relatable now in so many different guises and forms.
And young Pastor Keon out of Texas as well. I think you were listening to him a
Yeah.
little. Yeah.
And so from that perspective, I think any way or shape or form you can receive it in is so important. And so the different parts of how I receive it is really really key to my development of my faith. From a personal perspective, I think when there was a lot of stuff going around me very close, there was one book by Gary Zukloff called The Seat of the Soul. And this book deeply, deeply resonated with me for a number of reasons. But, I think when you're going through things, or when you're going through life in general, it can all seem really personal. And you are experiencing a personal experience. However, the book really allows you to kind of see situations as they are and step away from them, so you can objectively evaluate them a lot more easily than you would do if you were just in your head all the time. But also recognizing, a lot of things you put attributable to you is other people's things that you kind of absorb, and you think it's your fault or your responsibility. And I just really, like, I bought it as a gift, more so for a lot of other people, as it's helped me to just untangle some things inside of me, and looking at past trauma and thinking about how does that show up for me today, and really trying to separate the act or the thing from who I am, and a lot of separation and untangling from like who you were in the past, so that you can step forward into the future without that additional baggage. And this book has really helped me to do that and achieve that. And then the final book that I'm reading at the moment is, you might not have heard, it's called Inner Glimpse by someone called Idil Ahmed, and on Instagram she's called Idillionaire. And again, this is about positive affirmations and really trying to lean into your best self. So she's giving you the tools to tap and lean into your best self. And I read kind of half a chapter or like 2 pages every morning, just to kind of give me clarity over my thoughts, and to say, right, okay, today I'm going to think and focus on this in the background as I'm going through my day. And so for me, it's all about mind, as you would have told, it's about mind expansion and mastery of self. Because I think if you can master yourself, your behaviors, your actions, how you respond to things, it means that you're less like a wave in the sea in this world, which can be very kind of destabilizing at times if you're not centered within yourself.
This is beautiful. This is so beautiful. Thank you. You ready to go 4 for 4?
Yes.
Okay. Well, Patrice, what 4 pieces of advice do you feel compelled to offer to our family right now? And if any of that advice was given to you by someone else, please give homage to them in the so sharing.
Okay. So the first thing I would say is that tomorrow is not promised. So whilst, and this is a biblical term, so I'll give that one to Jesus. But ultimately, I live life, and it's a bit of a balance between living life urgently, but also going with flow. And this is the balance that I'm finding, and I have to commit to every day. But it's really, the thing that you might put off, or the thing that you've got on your list that you really want to do, it's important for you to live your truth today and really lean into those experiences so that you can get things moving, because tomorrow isn't promised. And if COVID and the world and the ways of the world has anything to teach us now, is that you have one life to live, and it's your responsibility to live out your truth in the best way possible. And I'm not saying this as a hustle culture type thing. I'm saying this as you living out your truth and making sure that you're bringing your best self and doing what you need to do to achieve your potential. Because the worst thing is, I think it was Les Brown who said, like, the graveyard is like the richest place in the earth, right? Because it's where everyone's dreams are buried. So let's not have that, and let's not, become it and get to a place where we're disappointed that we haven't really fulfilled our potential. And it's never too late to start. That's the other thing. The next thing is, it's never too late to start. I've just turned 40. I'm on my 3rd career pivot, and I've done all of them really well. And I would say it's just never too late to start. If you had said to me at 21, Patrice, this is what your life is going to be like, I would be like, no, I'm going to have everything done by the time I'm 30. This is how it's going to work. But life can be so, can be disappointed, but it can also be so beautiful. And when you really lean into that, you can have such a much better experience. I've just had a call before this with a young mentor. He's like 21. And he was like, what advice would you give me? And I said, yes, I think it's important for you to achieve and build and really aspire to what you want to believe, what you want to achieve, but enjoy the journey. Enjoy the journey, because tomorrow isn't promised. Enjoy the journey. I think I've given you quite a few there.
And
then the final one, which I said before, which is stay ready. stay ready so you don't have to get ready, as you said, JBH.
Love, 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 love it. By the way, I stay ready to talk with you any chance I get. And I'm so thrilled that you're always ready for it. You have given such a blessing to us today, and we will be taking you up. Nathan, Sarah, and I on your invitation to come back and have that big conversation. In the meantime, this has been stupendous, and from my heart to your home, thank you, thank you, thank you.
Thank you, JBH.